Bobby called me on a Thursday morning. Not Sunday, Thursday. That was the first thing that felt wrong. We have an arrangement, Bobby and I. He calls Sunday evenings around 7. He tells me about his week in Atlanta. I tell him about mine here in Fort Lauderdale. We talk for maybe 20 minutes, sometimes less. He's a busy man. He has his life, and I understand that. I've always understood that. I made peace with that a long time ago. But Thursday morning the phone rang, and I saw his name on the screen, and something in my chest shifted before I even picked up. Something that lives in a father's body before it reaches his mind. The same thing I felt the night he called me from college to tell me he'd failed 2 classes. The same thing I felt when his first marriage fell apart. A father knows. Before the words, before the explanation, before any of it, a father just knows. I was sitting at my kitchen table. I had my coffee, real coffee, the way I make it every morning. The Fort Lauderdale sun was already coming through the window the way it does in the fall here, that flat Florida light that makes everything look sharp and honest. I had my newspaper open on the table. I had my coffee. It was a good morning before it wasn't. Dad, I need to talk to you about something. His voice was careful, the way a voice gets when someone has been thinking about a conversation for a long time and is finally having it. I put my coffee down. What's going on? Is everyone okay? Everyone's fine. It's not that, but I need your help with something important. He paused. A long pause. The kind that fills a kitchen even when you're alone in it, he explained. A business deal that had gone wrong. A partner who hadn't delivered what he promised. Money that had been committed and now couldn't be recovered without a legal fight. And legal fights cost money. Money he didn't have right now. Money he needed fast before the situation got worse and lawyers got involved and everything became harder and more expensive. He needed $20,000. I sat very still at my kitchen table. The Florida sun kept coming through the window. My coffee got cold, and I felt something I had felt before with Bobby, but had never let myself name clearly. Something that lives underneath the love. Something quiet and honest that sounds like a small alarm going off in a room you've been pretending not to hear. $20,000. I want to tell you something that most fathers don't say out loud. When your son calls you and tells you he needs $20,000, the first thing you feel is not anger. It's not even surprise. The first thing you feel is the pull. The deep ancient pull of a father who was raised to believe that providing is loving, that if your son needs something and you have it, you give it, that saying no to your child is a kind of failure, a failure of fatherhood, a failure of the thing your own father taught you a man is supposed to be. My father worked himself to death. He died with cracked hands and a bad heart and not much in the bank, but he never once let his family go without. Never once said I can't when his children needed something. That was his definition of a good man. You provide. Whatever it costs you, whatever it takes out of you, you provide. And when he died, people at the funeral said he was a good man, a provider. And I believed that was the highest thing you could say about a father. I carried that my whole life, 62 years in manufacturing. I provided. I put food on the table. I paid for school. I fixed the car when it broke. I showed up. I was there when it mattered because that's what my father showed me a man does. That's what I thought love looked like. Not words, not time, money, presents, fixing things. That's the language I learned. Bobby, I said, tell me everything. Start from the beginning. He did. It took a while. And as he talked, I listened. Not just to the story, to the spaces between the story, to the parts he was careful about, to the parts he moved past quickly, to the parts where his voice changed slightly, just slightly, the way it does when someone is editing as they speak. And I started to see the shape of what had actually happened. Not a partner who had betrayed him, a decision that hadn't been thought through, a risk that hadn't been calculated carefully. A man who had moved too fast on something that looked good on paper and wasn't as solid as it seemed. He wasn't in disaster, he was uncomfortable. And there's a real difference between those two things that I've learned to recognize over the years. Dad, I know it's a lot, but I'll pay you back within a year. I swear, I promise. The word promise, I heard it, and something in me went very quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that comes when you recognize something you've been avoiding, because Bobby had promised before. 3 years ago, he needed money for a real estate opportunity that was going to change everything for him. A sure thing, he said. He was going to pay me back in 6 months. The 6 months became a year. The year became 2 years. I stopped counting. I told myself it was fine. I told myself it was a gift, not a loan. I didn't want to make my son feel bad. I didn't want to have the conversation. So I let it go and I called it love. And before that, there was another amount, something to do with his divorce, legal fees that came faster than he expected. He would pay me back as soon as things settled down, he said. Things settled down a long time ago. I know because I watched from a distance as his life got easier and steadier. That money is gone. It was always gone. I just needed a few years to admit it to myself. Bobby, I said, I have to think about this. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Dad, it's kind of urgent. The deadline is real. I need to know by the end of the week, or the situation gets a lot worse. I said, I hear you. I'll call you by Thursday. I hung up the phone and I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that. The coffee was cold. The newspaper was still open to the same page. And I started doing something I had never done before in all the years Bobby had asked me for help. I got a piece of paper and I started adding it up. The real estate money, the divorce money, smaller things before that, amounts I had forgotten on purpose because forgetting was easier than accounting. Money for a car repair when he was between jobs. Money for a deposit he needed immediately. Money that came with a promise and left without a goodbye. I sat there at my kitchen table in Fort Lauderdale and I added it up slowly, carefully, honestly, and the number that came out the other end was bigger than I had let myself know, much bigger. A number that had no business existing between a father and a son who loved each other. And now he was asking for 20,000 more. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed and stared at the ceiling the way you do when your mind won't stop turning something over. And I thought about the money, not as a number anymore, as what it actually is, as what it actually means at this point in my life. The money I have saved is not extra money. It is not money I keep because I enjoy having a savings account. That money is what stands between me and having to ask my children to take care of me. That money is what lets me live here in this apartment alone, on my own terms, without being anyone's responsibility, without calling Susan every time something breaks, without asking Dave to drive me to appointments. That money is not comfort. That money is my independence. That money is the difference between being a man who manages his own life and being a burden on the people he loves. If I give Bobby $20,000 and something happens to me next year, a medical situation, a fall, something that requires care or assistance, what do? Where does that money come from? Who helps me? Bobby? The same Bobby who promised to pay back money 3 years ago and never mentioned it again? I lay there in the dark thinking about that, and then I got up. It was around 2 in the morning. I made myself a cup of coffee even though I knew it wasn't going to help me sleep. I sat at my kitchen table in the dark, and I looked out the window at Fort Lauderdale at night, and I thought about my father who never said no, my father who gave everything he had and died tired with cracked hands and a body that had been used up by 60 years of providing. My father who taught me, without ever saying the words, that a man's love is measured by what he gives up for his family, that sacrifice is the language of fatherhood. And I sat there at 2 in the morning and I asked myself something I had never asked before. Did that serve him? Did giving everything, never saying no, always absorbing the consequence, did that make him happy? Did it make us better? Or did it just teach us that someone would always come, that no matter what happened, no matter what decision we made or didn't make, there was a safety net with our Father's name on it? I didn't have a good answer, but the question sat with me until morning. I called Frankie the next day, Frankie DeLuca. We've been friends since we were young men in Tampa. He is the person I call when I need to hear the truth instead of what I want to hear. Some people have friends who make them feel better. Frankie makes me feel clearer. That's rarer and more valuable. I told him everything. The call, the amount, the history of amounts that had come before this one, the number on the piece of paper, the night without sleep, all of it. Frankie listened without interrupting. He is very good at that. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Henry, let me ask you something. How many times has Bobby paid you back? I didn't answer right away. He already knew the answer. He was asking me to say it out loud because that's what the truth requires sometimes. You have to hear yourself say it. Never, I said. He nodded. I could hear it even through the phone. Then he said, so this isn't a loan, Henry. You know that. You've known it for a while. A loan gets paid back. What Bobby is asking for is something else. And the question you need to ask yourself isn't whether you can lend him $20,000. The question is whether you can afford to give him $20,000. Because that's what this is, a gift with the word loan attached to make everyone feel better. And with what you have, with what you need that money for, with what it actually means to you at this point in your life, can you afford that gift? I was quiet for a moment. No, I said, I can't. Then you have your answer, Frankie said, and you need to stop feeling like that makes you a bad father. Because it doesn't. It makes you a man who has finally learned the difference between loving someone and rescuing them. Those are not the same thing. They never were. That phrase stayed with me for days. The difference between loving someone and rescuing them. I thought about something else during those days. I thought about Bobby's house. I've been there. It's a good house in a good neighborhood in Atlanta. Nice cars in the driveway. My grandchildren go to good schools, have good clothes, have everything they need. Bobby is not a poor man. Bobby is not someone who is struggling in any fundamental way. Bobby is a man who made a bad business decision and is looking for someone else to absorb the consequence of that decision. And for years, without fully admitting it to myself, I had been that someone, because I thought that's what fathers do. But sitting in my kitchen in the days after Frankie's call, I started to understand something different, something that changed how I saw all of it. Every time I had absorbed Bobby's consequences, I had taken something away from him. Not given something, taken something. I had taken away the experience of sitting with a hard situation and finding a way through it himself. I had taken away the muscle that only builds when you have no other option but to figure it out. I had kept him in some quiet way that I hadn't meant and didn't want to admit, younger than he should have been, more dependent than a man his age has any right to be, not because I didn't love him, because I loved him in the way my father loved me, in the way that feels like love and functions like something else entirely. I drove to Atlanta. The drive is longer than I enjoy these days, and my knees weren't happy about it. But some conversations cannot happen over the phone. Some things need to be said in the same room, with the same air between you, looking at a person's face while you say them. I sat in Bobby's living room. His house was warm and comfortable the way I remembered. Photographs of my grandchildren on the walls and shelves. Bobby sat across from me, and I looked at him carefully, and I saw something I hadn't seen clearly before, a man who was waiting, not panicking, not desperate, just waiting. Sitting back in his chair waiting for his father to come through the way his father had always come through. The rescue so expected it barely even needed to be asked for. Bobby, I said, I need you to hear me. I love you. Nothing about this conversation changes that. Nothing about what I'm going to say means I love you less. I need you to hold on to that while I talk. He nodded. His jaw was tight. He looked like a man preparing for something unpleasant. I can't give you the $20,000. He started to say something. I kept going. I want to explain why in a way that has nothing to do with whether I trust you. Because this isn't about trust. This is about reality. My reality specifically. The money I have saved is not extra. It is not sitting in an account waiting for an emergency that never comes. It is what lets me live alone. It is what lets me manage my own life without calling you or your brother or your sisters every time something goes wrong. It is what lets me not be a burden to my children. And if I give you $20,000 and something happens to me next year, something medical, something that requires care, I have less of that cushion, and I need that cushion. Not someday, right now. He looked at the floor. I also need to tell you something I should have said a long time ago. The money from 3 years ago, the real estate situation. You said you'd pay it back. You haven't. The money from before that, the divorce expenses. Same thing. I let both of those go because I didn't want this conversation. But not having this conversation cost us something. It cost us honesty. And honesty between a father and a son matters more than any amount of money. Bobby, I said, I am not your emergency fund. I love you completely, and I am not your emergency fund. I am your father, and your father needs to be secure enough to take care of himself. That has to come first, not because I love you less, because if I'm not okay, I become your problem, and I refuse to become your problem. He was quiet for a long time, looking at the floor, and then he looked up, and I saw something shift in his face. Not relief, something harder than relief. The look of a man who has understood something he was hoping not to have to understand. Then I said the last thing, the thing I had been turning over for days. Bobby, I think I've been doing you a disservice for years. Every time I said yes, every time I absorbed the consequence, I took away your chance to solve your own problem. And solving your own problems is the thing that makes a man capable. Your grandfather never really learned that lesson, and he passed it to me imperfectly, and I passed it to you the same way. That ends now, not because I'm angry, not because I don't love you, because I do, and because you are capable of more than you've been asked to be. He found another way. I don't know every detail of how. A conversation with his bank, a payment arrangement, some things restructured. It took longer than a check from his father would have taken. There were uncomfortable weeks, but he did it. He worked through it the way a man works through things when he has no other choice. And something in him was different on the other side of it. I could hear it the first time he called me afterward. He called the following Sunday at 7, like always. And he said, Dad, I figured it out. And I said, I knew you would. And he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, it wasn't easy. And I said, the things that matter rarely are. And then he asked me how my knees were doing. He asked if I needed anything from the store, if there was anything I needed him to send down. Small things, ordinary things, but they were different from before. Before, Bobby called me when he needed something. Now he was calling to ask what I needed. And that difference, small as it sounds, is everything. I want to say something now to everyone watching this, because I know many of you have sat in a kitchen like mine, with cold coffee and a phone on the table and a child's voice in your ear asking for something that would cost you more than they understand. I know the pull you feel for the fathers, The pull of a man raised to believe that providing and loving are the same word. For the mothers, the pull of a woman who spent decades putting her children first and doesn't know how to stop. For all of you, the pull of a parent who cannot stand to see their child uncomfortable, even when that discomfort is the consequence of their own choices. That pull is real. It comes from love, but it can do real damage when it's not examined, because there is a difference between loving your children and rescuing them. And most of us were never taught to see where that line is. Your money is yours. You earned it. You saved it. You went without things to protect it. And at this point in your life, it is not an inheritance your children are waiting to collect. It is your safety. It is your dignity. It is what lets you live on your own terms. And you are not a bad parent for protecting it. You are not selfish for protecting it. You are not failing your family by making sure you can take care of yourself. Your children are adults. They have time. They have decades ahead of them to recover from bad decisions, to earn more, to learn. You gave them that time by raising them. That was your great giving. And now the giving of everything is finished. Now the time for protecting yourself has come, and you are allowed to answer it. Saying no, really saying it, clearly and kindly and without apology, is not the end of love. It is the beginning of honesty. And an honest relationship with your child is worth more than any amount of money you could hand them. Bobby calls me differently now, not as a resource, as a father, and that is worth more to me than $20,000 ever could have been. Tell me in the comments, have you ever said no to your son or your daughter and felt like a terrible parent? What happened after? Did they figure it out on their own? Because I believe more of you have sat in that kitchen than are willing to say out loud. I'm Henry Walker, and I said no to my son, and my hands were steady when I did it, because I finally understood something my own father never got the chance to teach me. Taking care of yourself is not the opposite of loving your children. It is the very foundation of it.